An investigation has revealed the Israeli army has been using an untested AI-based tool for its bombing campaign in Gaza. The online magazine Plus 972 found the software known as Lavender had listed as many as 37,000 Palestinian men as targets. The Israeli army also judged it permissible to kill more than 100 civilians in attacks if the target was a top-ranking Hamas official. Well, let's speak to Antony Loewenstein about this. He's an independent journalist who wrote a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry called the Palestine Laboratory. He's joining us from Sydney. Anthony, thank you so much for being with us. So you wrote this book about Israeli army tactics and arms. Can I ask you first, how widespread is the use of artificial intelligence in Israel's current war in Gaza, and what effects it's having on the army's conduct on the ground?
It's ubiquitous, is the short answer. It was used by Israel before October 7 in previous wars in Gaza, but it's massively accelerated since. And there's been two reports by the author you just mentioned, Yuval Abraham, who's an Israeli journalist, who talks about the extensive use of AI by Israel in Gaza since October 7, and also matches some of the reporting and sources I've been speaking to. The short version is that that story goes into great depth about how essentially there was an attempt to kill huge numbers of low-level Hamas operatives. And the question, of course, was made, how is that decision being decided? Is it being made by humans? Is it being made by machine? That report states that at many times, huge numbers of thousands upon thousands of low-level operatives. And it's worth saying how that operative is defined is not clear. And there are a lot of Israeli officials in that story that say that at times only 20 seconds at best was given to every so-called target that was offered to the military. In other words, massive numbers of people were deemed to be expendable, could be killed. And one of the key points of that story that I think is so damaging to Israel, apart from the massive civilian death toll which we've seen in the last 6 months, is that there's no proportionality. In fact, this is the opposite of that. International lawyers have said in the last 24 hours since this report came out that, in fact, this is the key problem for Israel here, that there was an attempt, as the story itself says, for revenge. Revenge is not international law. Revenge is illegality.
Interesting. I was going to ask you what international law says about the use of such tools in war, and this specific tool, but also the human supervision aspect of it. Is this tool supervised on the ground?
Well, the short answer is no, and that became very clear in that report, that huge amounts of targets are generated, and that information's coming from Israeli sources, human sources. My suspicion is American intelligence sources, potentially also Australian, because Pine Gap, which is a major US military base in the centre of Australia, is also used by the US to give information to Israel. All this information feeds into a system and it spews out massive amounts of targets. And the problem is that the rules of engagement are so loose, as this piece states, that families of these alleged militants are killed, civilians, women, men, etc., even, non-militants, children. And that's a problem because the death toll, particularly in the first months, was so staggering. I mean, I think 15,000 to 20,000 in the first few months. And there's no evidence, in fact, by the way, that any of these people have any connection to terrorism. Zero. And we've seen the impact on Gaza, right? It's been leveled, which, of course, has been the point, as this report states.
That was the most shocking aspect of the report for me, the amount of collateral damage the Israeli military was willing to accept when killing just one commander or two commanders. Now, coming back to some other reports in the Israeli media following the killing of these aid workers, which have suggested that there's a lack of discipline within the Israeli military that's operating in Gaza right now. Is it a lack of discipline per se, where commanders on the ground are not obeying orders, or is it more a case of the commanders on the ground setting the rules for themselves?
It's a combination of both. I mean, this sort of lack of real moral, ethical, legal barriers existed long before October 7. There's huge amounts of examples in the last years of Israel essentially committing mass slaughter in Gaza and, frankly, at times in the West Bank. And there's no accountability for these crimes, which, of course, is why they continue to happen. I think also it goes to a broader point about Israeli society, something I've written about for years, having lived there for quite a long time, is that there is a culture of dehumanization of Palestinians. So if you don't see Palestinians as human beings or as equal, if you kill 15, 20, 30, 40,000, who cares? It's justified in that mindset, putting aside the illegality of those orders. It's also worth saying that after these reports about AI-enabled warfare in the last months, and this ties into what I've written about in my book, Israel is currently trying to sell these tools to foreign entities, to governments that are looking to what Israel's doing in Gaza, not with disgust, but actually with admiration. And we'll find out in the coming months and years who they may be. But my sense is it's going to be countries that are currently saying they're opposed to what Israel's doing, but in fact are looking to engage those tools in their own conflicts and wars in their own countries.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see what international law says about all this as AI tools evolve and so on. Thank you very much for talking to us. Antony Loewenstein, author of the book, The Palestine Laboratory, joining us there from Sydney. It was very interesting to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.